how do we transition from leading with a heavy armor to lead from truly an authentic power and truth of who we are?
Who would I be without this job, without this title? Systems are crumbling. The only way out of this is for the individual to come through first.
What are those armors? What are those behaviors?
Authoritarian, gaslighting taking place in the workplace. Whatever you have not fully looked at in your family of origin is going to show up in your corporate culture. What is it that's going to take us to the next level? What is it that's going to make us better individuals, better leaders?
Welcome back to another episode of Extraordinary Leadership podcast. My name is Dagmar Aswork. I'm the founder of Extraordinary Leadership and transformational partner to executives and CEOs who I help to evolve from within so that they can build high-performing organizations, lasting legacy impact, and fulfilled life. Now, in this episode, we are talking about a topic which is very close to my inner journey and the journey of many of the clients and leaders that I have a pleasure to guide and meet. And it is about how do we transition from leading with a heavy armor that we have agglomerated along the life with many protection mechanisms to lead from truly an authentic power and truth of who we are. And in this conversation, thanks to having a special guest today, we are going to go one layer deeper in this conversation and also look through the lens of how trauma impacts this journey, that evolution that also impacts at the end leadership and business success. And so without further ado, my guest is someone who brings over 3 decades of experience, merging 3 intersections of personal transformation, somatic practices, and conscious leadership. Nancy Zabane, who is transformational well-being educator, senior practitioner of compassionate inquiry, which is a trauma-informed approach developed by Dr. Gabor Mate, and she worked across the Middle East and internationally supporting leaders and communities in deep self-inquiry and embodied awareness. She basically bridges the inner healing to the outer impact. So, without further ado, Nancy, pleasure to have you here with me.
Dagmar, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And my very first question goes from curiosity. What were the pivotal moments in your life that had kind of put you in a path that you are now?
That's really a great question. Thank you for asking it. And funny enough, a young man, 22 years old, asked me the same question yesterday. And I was reflecting on actually something quite pivotal that happened in my life when I was exactly his age. And it was a death at the time of a loved one. He was my boyfriend at university. And it opened many doors around trying to understand what life was really all about and beginning to ask myself the big life questions. And I already had a connection to the who am I question. It wasn't new to me, but it took it to another level. And then, of course, I met my wonderful husband. We had children. I did what a lot of young, bright women did at that time, which was get on the hamster wheel, build the achievements, the accolades, collect more and more of those things in my life. I always say accumulated wealth and knowledge and achievements and homes and houses. And I got to a place after my daughter was born, so 2007, where I was really very burnt out. Spinning wheels, something that we see a lot in leaders. And I also struggled with some health issues. And that was a moment for me when I realized I couldn't keep going the way that I was going. My marriage was also facing some big challenges. And I had to go inward. I was focused so much on my role out there. And it was my time to really say, okay, Nancy, who are you? Who are you really? Beyond the identities, beyond the role of mother, beyond the role of public speaker, beyond the role of wife, beyond the role of daughter. Who are you behind all of this? And that is when I really began a deep, deep journey of self-transformation, which also included quite deep spiritual work.
Beautiful. Yeah. So that very impactful moment in your life when I hear about very sincere and also traumatic, right?
Yes.
So what happened? What happened in this journey? Tell us more.
So what happened was I was searching. I began to search. I began to look around, look towards kind of new avenues for learning. And I had the blessing of meeting an incredible spiritual teacher who helped me see things that I wasn't seeing within myself. I also began to train in different coaching modalities, everything from NLP to coaching fundamentals. I acquired a deeper skill set in the somatic therapeutic realm and took on deeper training in Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga, people say, well, what is Kundalini Yoga? I don't know what yoga is. I can't sit still. Or is it stretching? Is it this? Is it that? Kundalini Yoga, it's a way of life, actually. Yoga means to yoke the finite with the infinite, to yoke that which we can see with that which we cannot see. And I was so fascinated by this incredible practice that amalgamated the dynamic movement, the conscious breath work, the eye gazing, the meditation, all in one practice. And not just that what happened on the mat was a microcosm for what could happen off the mat. So that really we were able to take this idea, this concept, and this deeper knowing that the world is our ashram. It's not just happening on the mat, what you're doing, this experience of the unpredictable. Because Kundalini Yoga is very Kriya-based, which means that you never know from practice to practice whether you're going to be kind of breathing really heavily or jumping up and down or shaking. But also when we meditate on the deeper philosophical questions of life. So that was a really big piece that kind of took me deeper and deeper and then helped me bridge my already existing understanding of counseling skills and coaching and take that into another level. Now, those doors opened into what I began to see as gaps in my own training because I began to train teachers. And one of the gaps that I was seeing was that we didn't have enough tools to support people in addiction recovery. And people say to me, well, what is addiction? And I'm like, listen, we all have something, right? Anything that we do on autopilot, and we know that it has negative consequences, but we can't stop it, right? We are helpless to stop it. And it just kind of continues, and it can be everything from drinking too much coffee to having too much sugar to the compulsive overeating to having an addictive thought pattern. And so I began to train in addiction recovery skills, and I met some incredible teachers. And one of my teachers at the time was Dr. Gabor Mate. So this was in 2013, 2014. I met also a brilliant teacher at the time who began at that time to work very closely with him. And through that, I deepened my skill set in that realm. I began to know myself because I struggled with my own tendency towards codependency. That was my addiction. And I always say addiction, if you know what it is, once you grasp it and you know where it's coming from, then that thing that you were doing in a default way can actually become your superpower. Because in a way, this codependent thing that I had was this overextending propensity. But that's a gift when you're working in the healing space, as long as it has boundaries and as long as it's regulated. So that led to the next phase, which essentially was when I was invited as part of a small group of clinicians, therapists, and teachers to experiment with Dr. Gabor's psychotherapeutic approach. And he kept saying, I have nothing to teach. I have absolutely nothing to teach. But people were observing him and saying, you really do. You're working with addicts, you're working with people in palliative care, you're working with leaders, and you have something. Please do something about it. So I was part of that first cohort of, let's say, trainees that observed the method. And one thing led to another. I was blessed enough to be able to go to Vancouver, be observed by Gabor. He, in fact, kind of gave the green light that, yes, you can work with this approach. That was in 2018. 2020, we know what happened. in the world. We had the pandemic, and of course the mental health epidemic. And another aspect of that was this realization as well. The word trauma was no longer a word that was just being used in, clinical circles. It started to be used more openly. Gabor published a book called The Myth of Normal. He also made a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma. And more thought leaders propelled themselves into the social media space, and the awareness began to amplify. And that is when compassionate inquiry, which is the psychotherapeutic approach that he founded, kind of was catapulted into another phase. And I am now lucky enough to be representing the program in the Middle East and North Africa, not just as a practitioner or an educator, because I'll be running facilitated short courses as of March, but as the MENA country coordinator. And we see this as an optimum time to reach people in the Middle East and North Africa. And finally, mental health issues are being talked about. But it's not just about mental health. It's about leadership. It's about living your best life. It's about trying to find that space of authenticity. It's about cutting through everything that stands in the way of our ability to live our lives to the fullest. So my work now, whether it's through yoga, through compassionate inquiry, through the addiction recovery realm, and through so much of what I do, my counseling practice, my very active counseling practice, is about that. What is it that's going to take us to the next level? What is it that's going to make us better individuals, better leaders, better clinicians, just better people all around? Yeah.
Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
Impressive story. And Gabor Mate is known. I think I came across also his work a year ago, actually, because it was interesting. And he definitely is leaving a mark, I think,
Yes.
with his method and approach. His presence is also extremely interesting and very grounded. So many questions that comes, but I think the first, let's unpack what trauma is.
So trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. Okay. So where do we suffer with some disconnect, with some belief system that we are just stuck to? So an example of that would be, I'll use my own personal example. Growing up, middle child, I had quite a disciplinarian father. He was extra strict with my brother, and it wasn't always easy to kind of witness that. And being the second and being the girl, my brother was older, I felt I had to sort of overextend, try to sort of adjust my behavior or adapt my behavior to survive. Not that I don't absolutely love my dad and he's a huge teddy bear, but at that time, I began to tell myself, in order not to be like my brother, I need to be something else. And so who did I become? I became a people pleaser. I became somebody who just did really, really brilliantly at school, overachiever, always kind of how can I dance between the raindrops? And I would do that to my own detriment. Okay, so that program of people pleasing was on autopilot for many, many years until I realized it was too much. And I had no choice but to look at it and see it for what it was. And the trauma, therefore, was the belief that I had to adapt to that environment. Nobody told me that I had to become that pleaser. Nobody told me that I needed to go into more enabling or codependent behaviors. But I believed that in order to survive, that is who I needed to be. So that was the disconnect from the authentic self. The authentic self is pure, is coherent, is unobstructed. But the mask that comes in its place, the persona, the mask, is what we create. And this is what brings me to the armor piece, which is really beautiful, is what we believe we need to maintain in order to survive and thrive in the world. But what we're seeing actually is a lot of people who don't have that awareness and who are just operating in autopilot, and who go into leadership roles, who go into marriage, or who go into society, and they have no awareness that on some level, something inside of them just was disconnected. And without that awareness of when that happened, and there isn't one single story, I'm not saying there was that one thing, right? It's who did I believe I needed to be to survive in this world? And that's a story that nobody imposes on you. That's a story that you create. And compassionate inquiry is incredible in that we help the client to go into that place of self-knowledge so that they can see actually that everything in their lives and everything that they believe to be true is their own belief system.
Isn't
Nobody
that
told us.
fascinating,
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It looks at the end so simplistic when you are in this work, right? I'm like 10 years in this transformational space myself. In a nutshell, it's exactly what you said. It's shaping your own destiny. It's by shaping your belief system, by, of course, expanding safety in the nervous system and body, right? Because it's not only the mind and subconscious mind, identity, 100%. Subconscious mind, nervous system, all three important. And we can choose because we creators. We're here because we actually are meant to be creating and defining it.
Yes.
But we unconsciously running on those automated, right, patterns on subconscious level, so we know that we're about them, that actually we're like puppets of it, right? It's like 5% is conscious thinking, right? We believe we're conscious, right? But without stepping into that work, we have no chance to even understand what conscious means. And I love what you said. First, you were wiring back to the beginning of what you said about trauma, because obviously that word is not, it's resonate not yet with everybody.
No.
Now talking just purely business leadership and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But I think, as you said, it really comes more to awareness. And I think it's important to understand actually everybody in a childhood went through some sort of light or heavy trauma. It's not only the trauma we think is a trauma.
Exactly.
I know mine was a really traumatic childhood, so it's very easy for me to define it like that. But now I also comprehend everybody actually had some level of need to survive.
Exactly.
Right? Needs to survive, and as a result of that, developed these mechanisms of protection. So we were unconscious about shaping ourselves below the age of 7, basically. Right?
Yeah.
And so we never open that box and go into the inner growth, inner work, whatever you want to call it, through different modalities, right? You're kind of adults with a 7-year-old operating system.
It's so interesting. I was at an event a few days ago, and Marianne Williamson, who's a big thought leader in this space, she actually said, we have no time in this world for little boys and little girls. She ended her talk by saying, we have no time to be little boys and little girls. And what she meant was exactly this. We can't live anymore in a world that is run by our unconscious behaviors. We can't live anymore in a world that is run by, that is dictated by our traumas and our reptilian brains, and where we're all just operating from a dysregulated space. But one way forward is to actually look inwards, right? We cannot move forward. We cannot go outward unless we move in. And this is huge. And this is such an important piece. And I think that's really interesting, is like everything that we know. Of course, we have more and more information, more and more access to knowledge, more and more thought leaders are speaking about it. We've got social media kind of throwing it in our face. But changing the stigmatization around this understanding of what trauma is, that's huge. To be able to say, whatever you needed to do to survive is the trauma, actually. Whatever you believed you needed to do to cope, whatever you believed you needed to do to go into the world, to go into your families, to go into your schools, whatever it was, is the thing that is now actually it's standing in the way of your ability to live from an authentic place. And we create, of course, what happens as a result, because we have this buildup, because we're on survival mode. We have suppressed anger, suppressed sadness, suppressed shame, suppressed guilt. And what is dictating our choices? All of those emotions, right? Absolutely. So what are we seeing in leadership? A lot of angry leaders living in shame. And I always say shame is a poor excuse for humility. What we really need is more humility in the leadership space. And we don't see enough of it because we don't have that deeper contact with what is true within.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, it's very much resonating with, the mission of my work because I kind of, through different journey, came to the same conclusion through my own journey, of course, that exactly that is missing. Support in inner growth, right? Inner work, liberating yourself and rewriting your stories and expanding your identity and regulating your nervous system, all of that. It's a time that I was in a corporate space, which is also a long time ago, but I think mindfulness was the very first thing that we're starting to do. Now, of course, we are in a much more advanced space, but I think still there are a lot of gaps.
Big gaps.
Into bringing effective solutions and not prioritizing it as a part of a leadership development and executive support or any leadership support, because at the end it's left currently to a personal growth,
100%.
Personal investments, personal decisions. So for me, it's like leaving the course of a business, an organization and culture and many people and many talents to the decision of if I have courage to go and maybe explore personal growth rather than bringing certain solutions already as a part of support system, because the pressure is high and that is where those mechanisms are most alert, right?
I believe that the most successful organizations in the future will be organizations that really, truly invest in this kind of leadership, in this kind of awareness and consciousness that is like literally, you want to work for us, you've got to go away, you've got to do your work. And that means, getting on with a practitioner or a therapist or having systems in place where trainings can happen so that people are literally doing that inner work on themselves. I mean, we run compassionate inquiry circles for businesses now, and they run, for example, for 10 weeks. That's a start, right? But you can't do it on a half day, whatever, deep dive, leadership deep dive. You definitely can't do it on a 1 week retreat. That's just a taste. Like, you can drop ideas and concepts, but for people to actually begin to self-reflect and take ownership, take agency, take accountability of their lives, they need to be doing that inner work consistently. And I would personally make it mandatory for people who were working with me to be consistently doing that work, which is quite confrontational, but it's like, you want to be a leader in this space, you need to know yourself better.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end, it's just the language, how we bring it to, but it's basically a state mastery from my perspective, right? And there are different ways and modalities in how leaders and people can, go through this journey. It's very individual as well in terms of, what resonates when. Many start in the mind work, right?
Yes.
Then deepen the work into more somatics and energetics, because that's kind of a natural, transformational human evolution of consciousness. So it's also, I think, need to be aligned with where the people are in organization and where we're jumping off, highly mature and conscious, or, at the beginning of the journey, all of that systems, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking, let us put the spotlight on what are those armors? What are those behaviors? Because that might be, getting it much more clearer for the listeners as well. It's like, that might be it. Oh, that might be it.
So behaviors that we might see in unconscious leadership are spaces where, for example, they're authoritarian. What is that about? What is that really about when someone is just making decisions without actually consulting with anybody? Where we have, again, too much of this top-heavy approach. Another behavior would be, it's not even a behavior, it's more like, can I recognize that there's gaslighting taking place in the workplace? Can I recognize that people are stabbing each other in the back? Can I recognize that there's a lot of toxicity in corporate cultures? I mean, absolute toxicity. We create these cultures where people come in and you're kind of given a brand to work with and you're told, embody it in every way, live it, breathe it. And one day, 20 years later, you're kind of chewed up and spat out. And somebody 20 years younger takes, or 3 people 20 years younger take your job. And here you are invested, and you realize actually that corporate space is not your family, But what you're doing is you're actually projecting everything that was unresolved in your family of origin onto your boss, onto your colleagues, onto your subordinates. So what we see is a lot of projection, right? I see it a lot. My boss, whenever somebody goes on and on about their boss, I know that that's some unresolved piece that has to do with the primary caretaker or school teacher that had an experience with that individual. And if we dig around a little bit more, we discover that actually there's some truth to that. And there's a belief system. Why, for example, do you see people who are pushovers in the workplace, who take on those jobs that kind of nobody wants, doormats, pushovers? Because there is a leader out there that needs that for validation, and vice versa. And what is it about the pushover that is that they haven't self-reflected on? It's probably, something in them, something in their family of origin, something that they haven't fully worked on that's showing up. So these would be like some examples. Like I always say, like whatever you have not fully looked at in your family of origin is going to show up in your corporate culture.
Yes. But I found what are the typical, from the leadership lens, what I'm looking at is proving any sort of, and that has been my kind of limitation.
Yes.
Which is obviously rooted, it's you're not good enough or you are actually too much. That were my kind of source of the beliefs that I built around myself early on. But also pushing, also chasing, also pleasing, as you mentioned, right?
Yes.
Perfecting. Those are those. And as you mentioned, every trigger, I think that is like a golden kind of rule or indication, because the trigger is just an opening door to understanding yourself beneath the surface, where you need to actually resolve something within, right? And release.
So anytime you have a contraction, and this is why the somatic work is really important as well, because I always say mind, body, spirit. Okay, when I talk about spirit, I talk about that place that is bigger than us, that place where we have spaciousness, where we're able to take spaciousness, whether it's in nature, whether it's on the yoga mat, whether it's when you watch the sunset every day. Find it, make it bigger, make it consistent, have a discipline around it. Okay. The body, when we know our bodies well enough, and so many of us are disembodied, especially in the corporate space. Oh my gosh, that's the place where we see the most, the most addiction, whether it's people who are like literally high on substances, prescription drugs, coffee, and so many other things that are taking them away, taking them out of their body. When we have closer contact with the body, we actually are much more sensitive and attuned to what sits there, right? The stagnant energy that points to my anger, the tension that points to the voice that I'm not speaking, the shoulders that's not moving, the neck that's holding something else. So more embodiment is needed. I would say we need more embodiment. Of course, we can reach people through the mind and through concepts, and I think it's great. And we can talk about mindfulness until we're blue in the face. But unless people are actually practicing it, I always say, what do you have that helps you stay in the remembrance that you are more than just your conceptual thinking mind? We can begin with the mind. There are some great concepts. I can talk about polyvagal theory until I'm blue in the face, and we can go on and on about the nervous system and how important it is to regulate. And you're a nervous system and I'm a nervous system. And in order for us to be regulated, we need to be doing our stuff and keeping our cortisol levels down. But when push comes to shove, what I believe that we need is strong practices that keep us aware, self-attuned, that can include meditation practice, and meditation that helps us clear our subconscious garbage. Embodied practices, what physical activity do I have in my life? But a physical activity that keeps me well in touch with my body, my physical body, not just that helps me stay healthy, but it helps me be aware of what sits in the body. And then, of course, some kind of spiritual practice. And spiritual practice is that practice that helps us to expand beyond our smallness, beyond our finite identities, beyond our finite constructs of ourselves. Because we're so locked into our identity constructs, and that we see repeatedly over and over again in the workplace. Breaking out of that. Who would I be without this job, without this title? Who would I be if I wasn't a mother? Who would I be if I wasn't this big fat CEO. And by the way, all the time we see it. People retire or they get kicked out. At 60 years old, they get, chewed up, spat out, and they have no idea who they are.
True.
None whatsoever. And they begin the work only at 60.
Yeah. And I think that's why the work needs to happen earlier. And so many points, obviously, I know the constraints of our time because I could go in every of these details with you to explore. And one point on identity, I think also for listeners, identity actually is in evolution all the time, but we need to be designing it consciously. And I think the way I like to see it is to connect it with the source, with spirituality, with quantum, again, depending where you come from, right? It's about the awareness that the closer we are there, the closer we are to our source and to being actually our authentic, true, highest selves, right? The closer we are there. So that brings me to the question, let's bring the spotlight on what happens when people are really transformed. What is the difference that we can viscerally feel through the words?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I like to talk a lot about authenticity as it relates to truth. The truth of who we are. Who am I beyond the stories? Who am I beyond the limiting belief systems, the I'm not worthy, the I'm not good enough, the need to people please, whatever it is that my story is. We have three truths. An individual truth that is my kind of personal reality. A contextual truth that is what is my circumstances, what is my immediate environment. And there is a universal truth. And the universal truth that is the human truth. What is it that you and I can commonly agree on as human beings? Right? When we have a sensitivity to that knowing, that deeper knowing, and when we create these pockets of consciousness, I love to call them pockets of consciousness, we open up the possibility of having real conversations, real dialogue, real possibility. We break through those barriers of basically what stops us from growing. And whether it's growing in organizations, whether it is growing in society, whether it's growing in our families. When we know ourselves better, we're able to bring a better version of ourselves to each and everything that we do. Instead of bringing this limited, small version of ourselves that is just going through life reactive and not knowing. So more responsive, more regulated, more conscious, more aware, more sensitive, so that we're not just living with each other, but we're living for each other. And I love this kind of like living with versus for. If I have that awareness and that sensitivity, that I'm so much more than just my conceptual thinking mind, that I adhere not just to my own personal truth, but to the three truths together, then I really make space for the possibility of living a life of true service. And what does that look like? Right? Service is the service that flows through me. When you see people that are coherent, you feel it, you sense it. They're living in service. You're no longer just doing a job. You're no longer just in a role. You're no longer just the CEO of that company, but you are serving something greater than yourself. You're serving a community, you're serving your employees, your subordinates, but you're also serving consciousness, I like to say. And imagine if we had more of that in the world, more people who knew themselves, who had the ability to take accountability, agency, and were able to bring that best version of themselves to everything from their families, their marriages, to their work, to the leadership in the world. I mean, systems are absolutely crumbling. We had actually current Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speak at Davos just a few weeks ago. Again, like this, making bold statements. Systems are crumbling. What the world needs is more leadership, more authentic leadership. And maybe the reason all of this is happening is because it needs to happen. Because in a way, the system as we have known it is broken.
Yeah.
You know? This thing of like looking up for or looking out for something to save us, or for somebody to make a big decision, or for systems to suddenly come back together. No. The only way out of this is for the individual to come through first. And then we move into the contextual and the more kind of human aspect. So, yeah, I hope that kind of a little bit answers your question.
Absolutely. And I think you pointed out the two most important things, that the evolution is already actually ongoing.
Yes.
And beautiful push we have through AI, which challenges us because basically with, IQ is automated nowadays, right? And will be much greater than a human. So we need to go back to the human essence, right? So
Very
that's kind
true.
of where we are challenging it. And that will be just more force. And a lot of leaders already and people there are more programs, there are more healers, there are more coaches, there are more people in this space. So that's already going. The whole consciousness is rising in the whole globe, right? So that's kind of the wave. And I think as always, in order to come to the light, we need to come from darkness. So there is things happening just to lean us in the right direction. And from my lens, I always see when people go through that ascension, I call, or evolution, transformation, alignment, whichever words we can use, kind of describe the same. It's just people who are much more lighter, who are much more joyful, who are much more bolder, who actually, as you mentioned, have this magnetic presence that shifts the room, because that has the magnitude to actually shift the room and dynamic of the conversations to more people without even opening and saying anything. And aligned and trusting themselves. And this is actually how we create psychological safety and trust in our organizations. This is 100%. The only way actually we can to do that, by every leader at the time. That creates that ripple effect, thinking from organizational point of view, and as you mentioned, from the societal point of view. And of course, that ripples effect is on marriages and on communities and society. And absolutely, I'm with you with the vision of how we can save the world or improve the world or even do something better. So I hope the listeners, especially the people that are much more inclined into the best version of themselves, that's definitely the path if you haven't started it yet. And for any decision maker, I think that this conversation hopefully serves to consider, strategically speaking, because at the end it goes about the bottom line, but that is actually fueling the bottom line, right, in decision making, because that's the source of performance, of thriving culture, of speed of execution, of developing leaders and all of that. Nancy, if somebody who listens today would like to start the work, where would you point that person towards to?
I would point them to Compassion Inquiry. I would say
Obviously.
Call Me. I would say Call Me. It's a phenomenal program and there are different facets of it. So if you want to have just a brief introduction to it, that would be kind of one way to go about it. So there's short courses, there's longer courses, there's the year-long training. I would point them to Darshan, which is my platform and the work that I do, basically that amalgamates Compassion Inquiry as well as other consciousness raising techniques, including Kundalini Yoga. I run trainings. In fact, we just finished a life cycles training about a week ago. We had CEOs, we had entrepreneurs, we had mothers, we had people from all walks of life. And we do that with really, really incredible facilitators. I would say, come to China with me. I'm taking a group to China in May. That's also like a way to sort of get a feel for the work. I bring together many, many different tools in my work. Compassion Inquiry, Kundalini Yoga, Beyond Addiction. There's a lot of coaching work that comes into the work that we do. So there isn't one place to start. Some people will jump straight into the Compassion Inquiry. They might do a short course. They might do a year-long training. Some people will jump a little bit more into the somatic, what seems to be a somatic, but actually the yoga is deeply philosophical and brings a lot of these big life questions into the inquiry. So we do a lot of that deeper work, but as an embodied practice, very, very embodied practice. I would say begin with some, if you can't reach these specific techniques, at least develop some kind of embodied practice for yourself. Cultivate a meditation practice as well. And I'm very careful to say meditation, not mindfulness. Meditation, what is meditation? Meditation can be 3 minutes every day, a point of focus that helps you to create that spaciousness in your life. The more you do it, the more you're able to actually sharpen and focus and have coherence and have clarity, because you start to see the play. So it's not enough to know yourself. Yes, the Compassion Inquiry will take you there. But what you need is tools to help to keep you awake, because it's so easy to go to sleep and to default into those limiting beliefs or those limiting behaviors. So have those things that keep you uplifted, that keep you steady.
Absolutely. Those hobbies is a way of living. It's a way of being. And it's like how we rewire the old autopilot with the new Dave, right?
Exactly.
And that's what it was. Fantastic. Nancy, thank you very much for, being here and for your presence, for your wisdom, for sharing from your lens and, your journey as well into that. I knew that there is a story. We all learned through our own stories there. And thank you very much for this conversation today. And I hope it reaches those that are meant to hear it.
Thank you so much, Dagmar. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the listeners, thank you very much for being with us. And remember, extraordinary leadership starts from within. That's definitely a place to go. And this episode has provided you new lenses, new ideas of where you can start. So I hope you turn the awareness into action. Thank you, and see you next time.